Hi there, I'm Dr. Stacia West, the co-founding director of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania, and also an associate professor in the College of Social Work at the University of Tennessee. Really appreciate the invitation from the mayor and deputy mayor of the City of Seoul, as well as the International Forum on Safety Income, to speak with you today about guaranteed income programs in the United States. So there's actually a longer history than most of us know about guaranteed income in the United States. It actually started back in 1790 with Thomas Paine writing an agrarian justice, moving to Bertrand Russell, of course, a known philosopher and anarchist, writing a new social model that should combine the advantages of socialism and anarchism, and that basic income should be a vital component of that new society. Then, of course, Dr. King wrote in his response, a government response to poverty is both piecemeal and pygmy, called for a guaranteed income in his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? Then, surprisingly, President Nixon and the known economist Milton Friedman talked about a negative income tax and actually piloted a negative income tax in 7 cities, including places across the US, New Jersey, rural Iowa, North Carolina, Gary, Indiana, Seattle, and Denver. Our current guaranteed income experiments are, of course, led by Dr. Aisha Nyandoro with the Magnolia Mothers Trust, as well as with the former mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs. Let's talk a little bit about these guaranteed income experiments and their history. So as I mentioned, we had around 7 cities, the 1960s through the 1980s across the US, had a number of randomized controlled trials looking at the impact of a negative income tax on individual outcomes, including work and family life. Has a really fascinating story. Again, it was led by Moynihan and Nixon, and the initial results came out and they were pretty poorly presented and poorly reported on by the media. So the big headlines at the time were that guaranteed income is going to stop you from working and it's going to lead to divorce. I'll read you a quote from Moynihan. He says, "But we were wrong about guaranteed income. Seemingly it's calamitous. It decreases family or increases family dissolution by some 70%. It decreases work. Such is now the state of the science, and it seems to me we are honor bound to abide by it for the moment." So this is interesting, this for the moment, because what actually happened internally is the researchers were pressured to put out findings, and they even said this is going too fast. And so these findings came out. They actually had a second team of researchers come in and call out a couple of things with the research design that just really didn't make sense. For example, they were trying to study labor market effects without demand response for the labor market. And so what they ultimately found was this negligible reduction in work hours for 2-parent families. And we also saw that people were spending more time in school. Kids were doing better in school. There were fewer hospitalizations, and there was more time spent caretaking. So those are the actual findings of the negative income tax experiments. But because of the sort of public narrative that had been put out there by Moynihan and Nixon, it kind of died with neoliberalism as that was ushered into the US. So then shifting now to our current moment of guaranteed income in the US. The first to launch was the Magnolia Mothers Trust in Jackson, Mississippi. This occurred in the fall of 2018. It is non-experimental, so the researchers really did not, they've done sort of an internal program evaluation, so the things I'll speak about are about that. $1,000 a month for 12 months, initially to a cohort of 15 African-American women living in public housing in Jackson, Mississippi. Cohort 2 was then expanded to 110 individuals, cohort 3, 100 individuals. And so what they found in their program evaluation was there were improvements in financial security. People were able to pay their bills on time, more time spent preparing meals at home and spending time with kids. And they paid off over $10,000 worth of debt, which is an incredible amount specifically for this first cohort of 15 women. They also reported improved food security. So promising findings with that study. Here's a photo of one of those families. The next, of course, and possibly the most popular guaranteed income demonstration that's occurred in the US is the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration. So this was a city-led demonstration that began in February of 2019, of which I, along with Dr. Castro, who's the co-founding director of the center, were the PIs. So again, in Stockton, California, it was a randomized controlled trial in which we had both a treatment and a control condition. They received initially $500 a month for 12 months. And it was ultimately expanded to be 24 months, specifically as a result of the pandemic. This, you kind of think about it, occurred 1 year of the pilot pre-pandemic and 1 year of the pilot during the pandemic. So in the first year, what we saw was improved financial security for recipients compared to the control condition. They had less financial volatility or month-over-month deviations in income, which we know can cause stress in the body and the brain. There was reduced anxiety and depression as measured by the Kessler-10 and the Short Form Health Survey 36. There was improved full-time labor force participation, and importantly, more time spent with family. In addition to the surveys that we did to understand the impacts on financial security, anxiety, and depression, those sorts of things, we want to understand the how did this happen. So we actually did in-depth interviews multiple times with the participants to understand more depth about the way that guaranteed income impacted their lives. And what we heard time and time again was it allowed more bandwidth to spend with friends and with family, which we know are important predictors of mental health. As we move forward, there's been a proliferation of pilots across the US in response not only to the positive impacts of Stockton, but also to the global, both public and economic crisis that was the coronavirus pandemic. So now we have over 100 pilots across the US, 29 of which are being studied at our center. This map here, provided by the Stanford Basic Income Lab, shows concluded experiments as well as active experiments. And so you'll see some of these if you go to this website, guaranteedincome.us. You can see concluded experiments and what they found all the way back to what we call the Sime Dime or the negative income tax experiments that were Seattle and Denver, as well as in New Jersey and North Carolina and Iowa. So you can see the results of those, and you can also see the active experiments that are occurring. This was last updated in May of this year, and so there's more on the way, I'm sure, at this point. It seems there are many nonprofits and governments are implementing guaranteed income programs. So what we're doing at the center as we approach this proliferation is we understood how important it was to have common instrumentation and design across the pilots, such that we would be able to look at regional and demographic variation, as well as changes in dosage and duration to understand what are the mechanisms of change for guaranteed income as it results to sort of microeconomic or social and economic outcomes. So here you can see we field a core survey every 6 months for all individuals. There are around 16,000 now that are assigned to both treatment and control conditions within the pilots that are researched at my center. So the core things that we look at are financial outcomes. What does income volatility look like? How is employment going? What are the wages? What are the industries? We use the Short Form Health Survey 36 again to look at physical health changes. We use the Kessler-10 to look at changes in anxiety and depression. We use the aptly named chaos scale, which looks at sort of the internal household dynamic. How are parents and children functioning within their household milieu? We use the Hope and Mattering scale. We also measure food security and assets, the ability to pay down debts and save for the future. Importantly, with all of these experiments, again, we do in-depth interviews with the participants because it's great to know if things change, right? Were they doing better with anxiety or depression? But it's actually more important to know what's the theory of change and how did this occur? So across 29 pilots, it's a lot of interviews with a lot of different participants. We have a great team doing this work. I want to also point out that in addition to the core surveys, because we do research that is community-based and really embedded with government institutions as well as nonprofit organizations, we ask communities to identify a couple of different research domains that they feel are most important in their own communities. So for example, the city of Los Angeles, which is running a pilot, one of the largest in the country, over 3,000 people receiving $1,000 a month for a year, chose that they wanted to look at community and interpersonal partner violence. So those are additional domains that we're looking at. New York, which is a sample of women who have recently given birth. We are looking at child and maternal health and development. In that specific study, we actually have 2 treatment arms, one of which is a $500 per month benefit for 3 years. The other is $1,000 per month. So it's an interesting study in that we'll be able to look at those outcomes as they differ by dosage and duration again. Santa Fe, New Mexico. So this is a pilot of actual community college students that are parents. And so we're looking at their progress in adult education, as well as childcare expenses and gaps that may exist. Madison, Wisconsin was very interested in transportation justice. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at in that pilot, as well as youth involvement in important developmental things like extracurricular activities and sports. So all told, at the end of the day, what we'll have in the center is a pretty large data set where we're able, again, to look at how does guaranteed income operate across geographies, across demographics, across different dose responses and different durations. And these are all important questions as we think about crafting new policies, a new social safety net that can respond to the needs of those that are most vulnerable in our society. I often get a couple of questions that I wanted to go ahead and respond to here. One, when will the findings be released? We're all eager to know how these experiments are going. So the Stockton findings will be released at the end of this year into January of 2023. And additionally, we have other reports being scheduled out into the fall of 2023, all the way through the end of 2027. So we're very much in active data collection and analysis mode at the center right now, but we'll have those findings available to the public as the pilots conclude, and we have time for analysis. We don't want another situation like what happened with the negative income tax experiments. The other question that I often get is, how do people spend the money? This is a question that started actually back when we were researching Stockton. People are very curious, especially now that we have taxpayer money involved, as to how folks spend money. It's really no surprise for those of us in social work and social welfare that have worked with low-income families for our entire careers. We know that people in poverty that are struggling with material hardship and deprivation spend money really responsibly. So if you go to the site, guaranteedincome.us, you can then see different visualizations across each of the cities that shows a spending breakdown of how the money is spent. And no surprise, most of it is on food, housing, basic expenses, utilities, transportation, those sorts of things that people use to support their families. Additionally, on that site, you can see demographics and details of all the pilots that we study within the center. So you can see, again, the duration of the pilot, the different dosages, those sorts of things. It's a great resource to understand kind of the scope of research that's happening in the US. I sincerely appreciate our funders, the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Arrow Impact, the Monarch Foundation, and many others that are supporting this important work across the country. Additionally, I'm incredibly grateful to be at all involved in the Safety Income Program of Seoul. It's been incredible to watch from afar. So I give deep gratitude to the Seoul Metropolitan Government for inviting me to speak today, as well as to Deputy Mayor Sang-Han Kim. I appreciate you. Take care.